Duck Duck Goose. Just what is this? A Netflix animated film? Does that mean it technically counts as a movie for me to talk about during Animation Explosion? Well, as it turns out, Duck Duck Goose was originally supposed to be a theatrical animated film scheduled for release in April of last year, but it got pushed back to August, then all of a sudden out of nowhere, it didn't get released in theaters and was released on Netflix instead. So I question, why am I forced to review this in the first place? Well, actually, I know the answer, but it's really painful for me to say. This movie actually had a theatrical release here in Australia. So because of that, I'm forced to review this movie. And if it wasn't released in theaters, I wouldn't have any motivation to see it because, yeah, this movie's bad. I guess it's not awful, it's typical run-of-the-mill bad. It's hard to say whether this or Sherlock Gnomes is worse, but it's still bad. Not that that's really a surprise or anything. The film centers on a goose, I think it's a goose, some people say it's a gander, named Peng, voiced by Jim Gaffigan. He's often cited as being the weakest in his flock. He's not the fastest flyer, and he's even considered to send flying with the kids. But when his flock leaves without him, he ends up breaking his wing thanks to an incident with a gong, and runs into two ducklings named Chi, who's voiced by Zendaya, and Chow, who's voiced by Lance Lim. I don't even know who that is. And they're also separated from their flock thanks to the accident, and so now they all have to team up to find their way back to their homes, or so they think. Look, I really don't have a whole lot to say on this movie because this is just one of the most cliched movies I've ever seen. Everything that plays out in this movie plays out exactly as I thought it was going to go. Right when Peng meets these two ducklings, they decide to play the liar reveal trope, and it goes just as boring and annoying as I thought it was going to be. Why do people still think using this plot point is a good thing? As long as it's done well, like in How to Train Your Dragon, I can buy it, but it just doesn't fit. It never works. Most of the time it plays out the same. It needs to fit organically with the story, but it just doesn't here. It plays out typically, cliched, predictable, just like all the other times it's been used in other movies. Otherwise, the entire film is essentially a road trip movie, where characters have to embark on many dangerous obstacles while meeting some colourful yet obnoxious characters. You know, despite all the wacky situations that go on in this movie, it's actually one of the most boring road trip movies I've ever seen, compared to something like a Goofy movie. Yeah, it's not as wacky and over the top as this movie, but it didn't need to be. It was a chilling and relaxing, funny road trip movie. It didn't need to be cartoony, even though it was at points. It was still enjoyable and relaxing. A movie does not always need to be like this when it comes to its story. And why do you need to include all of these damn cliches in it? Can't we just for once have the characters learning something in different ways? The characters are just as cliched too. Peng is the typical unlikable asshole who doesn't care about anyone but himself, always getting himself into trouble, and I remind him that he is the reason why this whole thing is happening in the first place. If he hadn't have been such a stuck-up asshole, none of this bullshit would be happening. The ducklings are bland at best, but also have annoying tropes. Chi is the sassy, smart teenage character, and Chow is the fat, stupid one. Yeah, I haven't seen that before. And with a run-of-the-mill bad animated movie comes its fare of bad animated jokes, who might as well actually be just compared to how bad the ones are in Norm of the North. All the jokes are played as followed. There's butt jokes, there's fart jokes, and there's puking jokes. All the jokes in this movie are toilet humor. Like, I can't think of one joke that wasn't involve someone farting. Well, there's actually one other source of humor, but it's a little unneeded. There's also physical humor. There's plenty of times where the characters are constantly being abused to hell, or being hurt in several ways. It especially happens when Peng is paired up with the ducklings. There are so many times where he just looks like he's outright abusing them. You can't even say the animation looks that great. Sure, the backgrounds are kinda nice, but it's very generic and, again, bland. It's so boring to look at. It doesn't scream beauty. It's like you're looking at toast. Except it's probably more interesting to look at because you can actually do something with it. Not even the voice acting sounds like it's trying that much. With the exception of Zendaya and Gaffigan, who do an okay job in this movie, everybody else just sounds like they don't care. In fact, it feels like no effort or passion was even put into this project to begin with. So I asked the question, what exactly was the point of this movie being made? It didn't feel like anything special, or there wasn't even anything remarkable about it to begin with. You know, as bad as something like the emoji Emoji Movie is it stood out for a reason because of how bizarrely bad it was. This is just bland. Like, it doesn't do anything particularly awful to me. Nothing offensive, nothing shocking. It's just that. A bland, boring, forgettable movie. I'm almost not surprised that this movie wasn't released in theaters because it wasn't a movie that deserved to be released in theaters. Honestly, I wouldn't even say this movie is good enough to show to your kids, because there are some scenes in this movie that seem outright inappropriate for kids. Not just the violence that I brought up earlier, but there's also the climax where they're trying to escape from a restaurant where the ducklings are going to be cooked up. When I read some reviews on IMDb regarding that scene, some people said their kids were actually crying during those scenes. So no, I wouldn't even say show this movie to your kids. If they're just gonna get bored or scared of it, then what's the point? I question this movie's age rating because it doesn't certainly seem like family-friendly entertainment. And you certainly gotta put quotations in entertainment because Duck Duck Goose has got to be one of the most boring movies I've ever seen. I definitely don't think it's as bad as Normal the North, because it doesn't have this, but I certainly don't recommend it, and you'd probably be better off if you just skipped the damn thing.